If you're familiar with the process of making end grain cutting boards, then you probably recognize how I made these 3 bandsaw boxes. The first step in turning scrap wood into a blank is to get one straight edge and then rip the other side parallel. This is the really time-consuming part of turning narrow scrap wood into something useful. In this case, I'm going to leave the ends wild instead of trimming them. So I have to sand all the ends individually, and then I'm careful to keep the glue away from the ends when I glue them into boards. When I ran the boards through the planer, I had one significant case where the end of one strip blew out because the grain was going the wrong way. I didn't want to remove that much material with the drum sander to get rid of it, so after I scored a line, I removed the bulk of the material at the bandsaw and then cleaned it up with a chisel. On this first box, I'm running the boards vertically and front to back. So I set one piece aside to be the back and glued up the rest into a block. When I cut the block and the back in half at about 15 degrees to give it a little personality. I used a square as a straight line reference to draw the top and bottom of the drawer location. And then followed the glue joints to draw the sides, and then added curves at the corners. I left one corner where the entry point is going to be without a curve, again to add some personality, but also because that's always the most difficult curve to deal with on a bandsaw box because of the glue joint. At this point, it's your standard bandsaw box process. Finally, I like to shim the bottom and sides of the inside of the box so the reveal is consistent around the drawer, and shim the back so it's flush with the front. When I sanded the ends of the scrapwood pieces, I just left them with the 80 grit disc sander marks. I wanted to see what kind of textural effect that would have on the finished piece. For the second box, I'm running the boards horizontally, which is probably the most advantageous way of doing it. Rather than one big block, I can make my drawer separate pieces to begin with. I've cut all the boards to be the same width, except for the 2 that will be the top of the drawers. I wanted to make the handles integral to the drawer, so I included some extra width and made sure the pieces at the front were wide enough so that there wouldn't be a glue joint in this overhanging part. While I had the table saw set up to rip the boards, I raised the blade and made a shortcut in both ends so I could trim off this extra width from the ends that are part of the case. After gluing the boards into their respective groups, I cut off one end of the drawer pieces and then cut the two drawers to the same width. Then I glued those side pieces to the part of the case below them, with a couple of spacers around the drawer. I didn't glue it all up as one unit right away, because at this point the drawer is the same height as the side pieces, so it'd be really difficult to get that out again. And it needs to be in there to get the spacing correct. Once the glue dried, then I could put it all together without the drawers and use a square to line up the drawer openings, because there's nothing to reference on the ends. The scraps all came from flat sawn material, which means the growth rings are mostly running horizontally in the boards. The piece that I'm adding for the back is going perpendicular to the other boards, so I selected pieces that were mostly quarter sawn for that board. Wood generally moves about half as much across the growth rings as it does along them, so if I didn't do that, there would be differential movement between the two. On a piece this small, it probably doesn't really make any difference, but if you always think about wood movement regardless of the size of the project, then it becomes second nature to think about it when it really counts. Small projects are a chance to practice and reinforce the skills and knowledge you need for the big projects. I cut out the inside of the drawers entirely on the table saw. The only real difference is that instead of cutting off the back, I just trimmed a little off and then added another piece to make the back. I did it that way because the table saw blade's kerf is a lot wider than the bandsaw's, and I didn't want to lose that much space inside the drawer. Once it was glued back together, I ran it through the drum sander until it fit easily in the opening. Up to this point, I'd done everything with the table saw, but it would just be a big blocky chunk of wood without introducing some curves to lighten and soften it. I tilted the table on the bandsaw to about 20 degrees for the curve cuts on the bottom. I thought the angle would give it a little something extra over a straight curve. Take your time making the cut, because sanding it is no fun at all. For the drawer handles, I figured out how wide I wanted them to extend and freehanded an OG curve on a template, and then cut them out and sanded it smooth. I really like the effect of the angled curve on the bottom and the way it interacts with the layers of the scrap wood. You can't really see it on this one. So that led to the third box, where I ran the boards vertically and side to side. This is probably the least advantageous way to orient them, but the effect is pretty cool. It uses all the same techniques I've already shown you, so I'm going to leave thinking about how to approach it as an exercise for you. On the right side, the cut created a curve in the grain of the wood in the second layer, so that was a really cool and unplanned effect. The other side has a totally random look, which is also interesting. The only thing is I'm a little concerned about the short pieces on the dividers that stick out, because the grain is running vertically. When you pull the drawer out, it actually rests on those little pieces, and so they're probably going to end up breaking off at some point. I hope you found this video interesting. If you'd like to purchase any of these boxes, they're available in my Etsy shop. There's a link down below, or you can just search KRT Wood on Etsy.